In 1978, a mafia gang carried out the biggest cash robbery in U.S. history at the time. The leader behind this heist was a man named Jimmy Burke, one of the most notorious and powerful mafia figures. Hello guys, this is part 3 of the biggest mafia heist in U.S. history. So if you didn't watch the other parts, they are initial for you in order to understand this one. So go watch the other parts, grab something to eat, and watch this part that talks about the day of the heist. As we said before, Peter Greenwald needed another man to help him in the heist. This person was Louis Werner, a co-worker at the warehouse. Peter told Louis about the heist and said he'd been thinking about it for 2 whole years. The two of them sat down and began studying the details and figuring out how they could pull it off. They had detailed blueprints of the warehouse, knew all the exits, entrances, floors, offices, and rooms. They even had the work schedules and cargo arrival schedules, all the info anyone would need to pull off a job like this. But even with both of them, it still wasn't enough. There was no way they could control 7 workers and the supervisor on their own. They needed a team. Peter and Louis began to argue about what their next move should be. Eventually, Louis Werner betrayed Peter. He took the plan they had developed, the plan Peter had spent 2 years preparing, and went behind his back to the Mafia. Louis had a gambling addiction, and over time had accumulated massive debt, thousands of dollars, which he couldn't repay. And the debt was to the Mafia, who told him this was his final warning. Either pay up or face severe consequences. So to save himself, Louis decided to give the plan, the one Peter had spent 2 years developing, to the Mafia, thinking they'd execute it, forgive his debts, and maybe give him a small cut of the loot. He had always heard that the Mafia were generous with people who helped them pull off robberies. Through his gambling connections, Louis got the plan to the Mafia, and eventually, it reached the big boss, Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke, although just an associate of the Lucchese crime family and not an official member because he wasn't fully Italian, was essentially a leader. He had the authority to gather a team of mafia men, something typically reserved for full members or higher-ups. Jimmy put together a team of 10 people. These are the ones shown in the image in front of you. We won't get into each of their backstories now, though we'll talk about some of them later, because things will get wild between them at the end of the story. For now, we know Jimmy, the mastermind, and we know Tommy, the crazy one. But the list doesn't include Henry, their friend. That's because Henry didn't actually participate in the heist. It's unclear exactly why, most likely because he was busy focusing on his drug trade. But don't worry, he'll still play an important role later on. Back to the team. This man is Joe Buddha, one of Jimmy's closest guys. Jimmy sent him to meet with Louis, the warehouse worker who brought them the plan, just to verify everything was legit and that this wasn't some setup or sting. The Mafia are always suspicious and known for their violent methods when they're trying to figure out if someone is trustworthy or an undercover agent. So Joe Buddha met Louis and threatened him, told him if any part of his information was false, there would be consequences. Louis knew that dealing with the Mafia was dangerous and risky, but with his gambling debts, he had no other choice. He gave Joe everything: the warehouse blueprints, the list of workers and their night shift schedules, all the security procedures, how the valuable room was protected, everything. And he had no leverage. He couldn't even demand a cut, like, I want 10%. No, he just handed it over, hoping the Mafia would reward him later. And all of this happened behind Peter Greenwald's back. The one who originally came up with the plan, gathered most of the information, and had no clue that Louis had gone to the Mafia. Once Joe Buddha got all the information, he took it back to Jimmy. Jimmy called the team together, and they began planning how to execute the heist, what they'd need, and how it would go down. The plan. They'd use a black van and drive to the Lufthansa warehouse at the airport at 3 a.m. Why 3 a.m.? Because that was meal break time. The workers would all be on the third floor, in the cafeteria. 6 men, led by Tommy, would go inside through the front entrance. 2 men would stay in the van and drive to the back of the building, where the cargo gate was, like a garage door. They'd wait there for the signal that the team inside had secured the workers. All employees were expected to be in the cafeteria, except one, the supervisor, who would be in his office. Since he had the keys to the valuable room, they needed to find a way to lure him out without raising suspicion, so he wouldn't trigger the silent alarm or call airport security. This was Jimmy's plan, and it was approved by the team. Their inside man, Louis Werner, would notify them when the right moment came, when the room was filled with cash and valuables. Meanwhile, Peter Grunwald, the one who came up with the whole idea, still had no idea that Louis had moved forward without him. On December 8, 1978, Louis learned that a large shipment of cash was arriving at the warehouse, millions of dollars, brought in by a Lufthansa plane. The money would be stored in the valuable room. Normally, when such a shipment arrived, the money transport company would be notified immediately to send armored trucks to pick it up and deliver it to banks the same day. It wasn't supposed to stay in the warehouse long. But Louis delayed the paperwork. He slowed down the process, so the transport company didn't receive notification in time. The banks closed at 3 p.m. Because of this delay, the money couldn't be picked up, and since the weekend was coming up, Saturday and Sunday, the money would stay in the warehouse for 2 extra days. That delay was the key to the entire operation. Louis immediately informed the Mafia, and Jimmy began preparing his team. Everything was ready except one thing: the van. They couldn't use a van registered in any of their names, so they needed to steal a black van big enough to carry 8 to 10 people. It took them 2 days to find the right van, but they finally stole one at the last moment. Then, the operation was ready. The night of the heist. On the early morning of December 11, 1978, the team gathered 2 hours before go time to review the plan one last time. Everyone checked their weapons, handcuffs, masks, everything. 8 members got into the van, led by Tommy, who would command the operation on the ground. Jimmy and the 10th member drove a regular car to a nearby gas station. Their job was support in case of an emergency, like crashing into police cars to stall them if necessary. At exactly 3 a.m., the van reached the Lufthansa warehouse. The warehouse was located at the corner of the airport, close to the highway, with easy access and no major obstacles. 6 gang members, led by Tommy, exited the van and entered the warehouse. As expected, the first floor was empty. The workers were upstairs eating on the 3rd floor. The crew climbed the stairs and burst into the cafeteria, catching the workers completely off guard. They weren't expecting anything. They were eating, chatting, laughing, and suddenly, armed men stormed in. The workers were terrified. As always, the Mafia used violence and intimidation. They threw the workers on the ground, pointed guns at them, and issued threats. Tommy, known for being extremely dangerous, made it even worse. He would kill someone without hesitation if they said or did the wrong thing. One of the gang members, Jerry Valenti, later testified about how terrifying that moment was. Let's hear what he had to say. The situation was extremely frightening for the workers. It was a complete surprise, something they never expected and weren't prepared for. Tommy started checking each of the workers based on the information they had. There were supposed to be 7 workers on shift, and the gang even had a list of their names. To verify the identities, they ordered the workers to hand over their wallets and checked their ID cards. Then, Tommy threatened them, saying, "Now we know your names and where you live. We can get to you, or your families, anytime we want. So don't even think about trying to be a hero or doing anything stupid. Just follow our orders, and no one will get hurt." This kind of threat is typical for the Mafia. They don't just threaten the person, they threaten the entire family, which is highly effective in forcing victims to comply. Tommy reviewed the worker list. There should have been 7 employees, but in the cafeteria, break room, there were only 5. That meant 2 workers were missing. Meanwhile, the 2 gang members who stayed in the van drove to the back side of the warehouse. The 6 others who went with Tommy had entered through the front door, while these 2 took the van to the rear gate. The back of the warehouse faced the airport runway, and there was a metal security gate blocking access. One of them got out, cut the padlock, and they drove the van through to the back loading dock. This loading dock was essentially a large garage door where trucks would enter and exit with cargo. The 2 men waited there for a signal from the crew inside, confirming that everything was under control so they could open the garage and pull the van in. But time passed, and no signal came. The 2 gang members started getting nervous. They expected the inside team to act fast and open the door quickly. Every passing minute increased the risk. They were parked in an exposed area, and airport security was always active, 24/7. There were plenty of security guards and police at the airport, and some patrolled all corners of the area. The 2 men in the van, still wearing masks, realized they looked suspicious. If anyone passed by, they'd definitely draw attention. So, they decided to take off their masks to avoid suspicion. About 30 minutes into the operation, the thing they feared happened. Thank you for watching, guys. Part 4 will be dropping as soon as possible. If you like this video, I hope you help me by liking and subscribing to my channel to keep on posting good stories for you. Have a good day, guys.